Clara went on to give birth to 6 of Alois' children, only Adolf and his sister Paula survived to adulthood. However, right from the start, this had been a contentious union, as Clara was so closely related to Alois, a papal dispensation had to be obtained before they could marry. As an official in the Imperial Customs Service, Alois was well paid, but away from home a great deal of the time, and when he returned, his violence towards his son meant young Adolf had a far from ideal upbringing. His own words in later life are very telling indeed. "I never loved my father. I therefore feared him all the more. He had a terrible temper and often whipped me." The reasons for these beatings are largely unknown, but one theory is that Alois was determined to have his son follow in his footsteps and become a civil servant, while Adolf was set on a career as an artist. As is often the case with a violent disciplinarian father, Adolf sought refuge in the love of his mother, who he undoubtedly adored. Clara, in turn, poured all her affection into pampering her son, and in her eyes Adolf could do no wrong. When it came to education, looking at Hitler's frenzied concentration-making speeches, it's hard to believe that at school he was regarded as a lazy pupil. But when it came to reading about war, which he also loved to act out, he apparently became a great deal more animated. Interestingly, he always chose to play the underdog, and even from this young age, it's possible to see evidence of a trait that would see him determined to rebuild the German Empire from a position of extreme weakness after the First World War. By the time Adolf was 14, his father had died of a lung hemorrhage, and although Adolf was free from his father's abusive hand, with only his doting mother for guidance, Hitler lost any sense of discipline which he badly needed. As a result, Adolf was expelled from school and eventually persuaded Clara to let him opt out altogether at the age of 16 with no qualifications whatsoever. 2 years after the death of Alois, Adolf set off for Austria's capital Vienna in search of fame and fortune as an artist. When he was rejected twice by the Academy of Fine Arts, he attempted to make his living painting pictures from postcards to sell to tourists. But when his mother died of breast cancer days before Christmas 1907, Adolf Hitler was inconsolable. The devoted son hardly left Clara's side during her last weeks, and the family doctor said that he'd never before seen anyone struck with grief to the degree that young Adolf Hitler was. After his mother's funeral, he returned to Vienna, but found little to cheer him up, and although advised by the Academy of Fine Arts when he was rejected that his skills were more suited to architecture, he'd left school without the formal qualifications needed to be accepted for training. Even so, architecture would become an obsession for Hitler as Germany's Führer, and his architect, Albert Speer, was tried for war crimes at Nuremberg along with other prominent Nazis like Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess. Seeing images of Hitler at the height of his powers, without doubt he lived in comfort and luxury, his every whim catered for. But in the years after his mother's death, struggling to make his way in the world, it was a very different story. In fact, after becoming increasingly depressed with his failings, instead of trying harder, in November 1908 he despondently took to the streets in a state of depression and anxiety. Hitler had lost it all. His mother, his dream of becoming an artist, was homeless and ended up spending 3 months on the streets, contemplating the future and wondering what to do.